Hi, so today I would like to talk a little bit about accessibility in React Native. And I would like to start by explaining what are the accessibility standards and where we can find mobile accessibility standards. Then I will show you how we can apply them. And also we're going to see a few quick wins that we can apply to the React Native mobile apps to make them accessible much quicker. And finally, I wanted to show you the really cool library I found called React Native AMA. That's a really, really cool choice when you want to make your app accessible. So it all started with this incredible training. Sorry for exposing you, Luke. Really, really brilliant training about designing diverse and inclusive products. It really shifted my mindset about developing the products from making sure we deliver as much feature, as much value to the client, to making sure that the feature we deliver is accessible to the biggest number of people possible. So then everyone can use it, and the app that we are building is helpful for everyone. So if you haven't seen it already, I would definitely recommend to give it a go, because it's a really, really great training. And after this, I wanted to make the mobile app that I was working on more accessible. However, I didn't know how to do it. So I started by looking at some general accessibility guidelines that I could follow. And the most famous ones, the most widely used in industry, are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines by W3C. They are used, as I say, by pretty much every website. They're really well defined. Everyone uses them. They group the guidelines, the rules, into 4 categories. The first one is perceivable, which ensures that the user can see all the content in the app. Then we have understandable, to ensure that the user can understand every content in the app, and they also understand what they can do in the app, so all the operations. Then we have operable, which ensures that the user can actually execute all the operations in the app, and that the app doesn't ask a user to do something that they don't know how to do. And finally, we have robust, which ensures that the app can be used with the assistive technology. So for example, with screen readers, as we're going to see later on. And they also grouped the guidelines into 3 different conformance levels that maybe you have or have heard of. So we have A level, AA level, and AAA level. Very creative. So the first one is the most basic one, A level. And if your app doesn't meet this level, that means that it's not accessible by any people with accessibility issues. So every app should at least meet this A level. It's an absolute baseline. And if it doesn't meet that, it means it's a really, really bad app in terms of accessibility. Then we have AA, which is OK level. That's the most common level for most of the apps. And it means that the app can be used by people with most accessibility issues. It's not the biggest, it's not the best one, but this is the kind of the optimal level. Most of the apps follow this level. So that's kind of a go-to standard. And then we have AAA, which is the enhanced, advanced accessibility level. And I read somewhere in the article that actually not all the content can meet this AAA level. So not only not all the apps can even aim to meet that, because it's not possible. But if you can, yeah, definitely go for it. Have a look. But it's a very advanced level. And to illustrate what I just explained by the example, let's have a look at the example standard. And that's in the perceptible category. So we have the visual presentation of text and images of text has a contrast ratio of at least 4.5 to 1. And we can see that this is the AA level. And then if we go into a little bit, scroll a little bit further, we can see enhanced contrast guideline that says that the visual presentation of text and images of text needs to have a contrast ratio of at least 7 to 1. And we can see it enhanced, and it's level AAA. And I put this to illustrate the rule that if your app meets, for example, the AAA level, it also automatically meets all the levels below. Because as we can see here, the AAA level is automatically more strict than the previous level. So yeah, that's about the web content. As we can see, that the rules are quite well defined. We have quite a lot of examples, and like in one big file, yeah, really clear. So then if we try to find whether they have something about the mobile accessibility, they have one website, and it says that the mobile accessibility is covered in the existing standard that we just had a look at. And I don't quite agree with that, mostly because the mobile apps have different movements than the website. So for example, the scrolling or the swiping left or right is way more popular on the mobile apps than it is on the websites. Also, some like app-related components, like for example, the bottom sheets, are way more popular on the mobile apps than they are on the websites. And I feel that we should have some standards that would cover these cases, and they would tell us like what we should do to make these components more accessible. And that brings us to the problem that I think we're having, that is that accessibility standards for mobile apps are not well defined. And by that I mean there is not a single source of truth that we could use. There is no like easy way to get all the standards or the guidelines, all the good practices that we could apply to our app. So we really need to get out of our comfort zone. We need to spend quite a lot of time on research to find all the standards and to make sure that the app is being accessible. I think it's a good moment here to say that the standards are obviously not more important than the feedback from the real people with accessibility issues, but they are there to help us to design the app if we don't have the access to the feedback of people with accessibility issues. So they are there to help us, to guide us developing the apps. And this is like a good baseline point that we can then improve on based on the real user feedback. So yeah, I discovered this problem, and I thought it's a good, I thought of a good way to change this. So basically, I had a look at different sources. So first, I used this web content accessibility guidelines I just talked about. I also had a look at the React Native, Android, and iOS documentation, all the accessibility-related tips, guidelines. Also had a look at the website called Formidable. It's a really, really cool company. They do a lot of accessibility research. They have really cool guidelines, and they created a few accessibility libraries themselves. So definitely worth giving a quick look. And finally, I also checked the company called Funka, which is the company that's main goal is to make sure that the software is being accessible. So it's kind of like a consultancy company, I think, that just helps other companies to make the software more accessible. And they also have a few guidelines on mobile accessibility. And then I used all this information, all these guidelines, to create the mobile accessibility calculator that I would like to show to you now. And cool, okay. So a quick overview. We have the instructions how to use it above. Then the standards, all the standards are split into 4 categories. The one that I mentioned before, perceptible, usable, comprehensible, and robust. We can see every standard is either taken from the Funka or Formidable website, or it's being translated from this like web accessibility guidelines, but I translated them to like be relevant to the mobile apps, not to the websites. Yeah, so we can see the source of every single rule. We can see which component it applies to. So if you don't, for example, use videos on your websites, you can filter them out, and you don't need to see these rules anymore. We have some explanation and tips. So how to make sure that you meet this rule. And the two main columns that you are supposed to fill in is the score and the max score. And the reason I left out the max score is that because you can either just put 10 everywhere, or for example, if you want to count the number of components that should meet the given rule, you can just put the number of the components here, and then you can count how many of the components actually meet the rule. So for example, every image component in the app has an alt text. Let's say I have 4 image components, and only 2 of them meet the rule. So we have take score 5.0. And we can see that if the rule is not applicable, it's not taken into the final score. So the final score for the perceptible category is 5.0 at the moment. So I was hoping that this could be like a really good tool to kind of check how accessible your app is. And you can see all the guidelines, all the rules in one place. You can go through them one by one. And hopefully that would help you develop more accessible apps. Any questions on that? Cool. So now I would like to show you how we can actually improve the score. Cool. Yes. So we know how we can calculate the calculate the score, existing score of the app. So now how we can apply the standards and improve the score. So this is not the rule, but just before we start, I wanted to give you a few tips on how to test the app with the screen reader, which is the assistive technology that reads out the content of your screen. If you do it for the first time, it's really scary. Like when I did it for the first time, I thought I just broke my phone. I couldn't unlock it. I couldn't do anything with it. And it was just talking out loud, very loudly. I couldn't decrease the volume. Like, it was really scary. So before you start testing, make sure you remove any screen locks from your phone, because trying to put a pattern with this screen reader turned on is such a pain. And then add the talkback shortcut to the bottom of your screen, because then this would allow you to turn off the talkback very easily with just one click. And then when you test, basically to select something, you tap once on it and double tap to activate it. So for example, like a button. And then if you want to swipe, instead of swiping with one finger, you swipe with 2 fingers. And that imitates the real swiping. So the first tip is to use accessibility props. React Native has really good docs about using accessibility props. There are quite a few of them. And I wanted to cover the three of them that are probably most widely used and possibly also quite oftenly misused. So the first one is accessibility role that states the purpose of the component. It's quite generic. So for example, like a button of a text. Then we have accessibility label that describes the component, and it's being read when you focus the component. And then we have accessibility hint that states the result of the action that you're going to perform. And then hopefully you can see it in practice. Can you guys hear it, or is it too? Could we maybe increase the volume? Oh. Could I increase the volume in the? Oh, perfect. She has a really weird voice, by the way, so.
Button, press me. Double tap to activate.
So it says button, press me, double tap to activate. That's with no accessibility labels.
You don't have to use this because they won't hear you on the other side.
Okay, can you hear me? Can they hear me? Can you guys hear me online? Perfect, okay. So, yeah, the first one, no accessibility labels. So the accessibility labels are basically there to help understand what the component is doing when we use the screen reader. So the first one, if we have no accessibility labels, we have a pressable component. It just says button, and it reads out the content of the button. Then when we just add the accessibility role,
Accessibility rule equals button. Button, press me. Double tap to activate.
so it's basically the same. So for the pressable components, the accessibility role is automatically assigned because like they know like you want to press it, so it's the button. But then if we add the accessibility label that is the same as the text of the button, let's see if we can hear the difference.
Press me. Button. Double tap to activate.
So it's a very small change, but basically if you add the accessibility label, it's being read before the role is being read. So we have press me button instead of button press me. And I read quite a few guidelines. Some of them suggest if the content of the button is the same as the accessibility label, we don't need to put the accessibility label. But quite a few people said that it's actually easier for them to understand what the component is doing if we first read the label and then we say what the component is doing.
Button, press me. Double tap to activate. Press me. Buys lifelong app subscription. Button. Double tap to activate.
Okay, and then the third one, we have three of them. So we have label, button, and the hint. So the, I think label is being read out first.
Buys lifelong app to activate. Press me. Buys lifelong app subscription. Button.
Okay, so first we read the label. Then if the label is not being clear, so if the button is doing something else than the description would suggest, then we add the hint to tell the user what's going to be the result of the action. And then it reads the role. Cool, so now I thought we could do a short quiz. So do you think, here we have the button, the example button, and here we have the accessibility labels, accessibility props. So do you think this is accessible? Brilliant, and do you know, can anyone tell me why it's not accessible?
I think it needs to have a label because it doesn't have a title and it doesn't have an accessibility label, so you don't know what this is.
Nice, yeah, exactly. Because like the content is the icon, so we don't know what it's doing. So we have not enough information to tell the user what's being done. And that would be read as button, double tap to activate. Okay, so is this accessible? And that's a tricky one.
No.
Okay, cool. Why?
It's not explaining enough about what the audio is or what we're getting out of it, what the output is.
Okay. Does anyone has any other ideas?
Would it say button twice as well? Button.
Yep.
There you go.
Nice. That plays audio twice? It says play audio twice. Yes, so for me it's not accessible because it repeats the information. So it would say play audio button, plays audio button. So we say button twice and we hear play audio twice. And to your point, Ben, so that's a quite interesting, like I struggled with this at the beginning when I was also like adding some label hints because I tried to add like too much information, and we need to remember that because like we try to make it accessible, it doesn't mean we should give like more information than to the user that would not use the screen reader. So like the other users probably don't know like what audio would exactly mean in this context either. So if we can like, you know, like add the information, but not too much of it to not overwhelm the user. But I think I'm gonna have another example for that. Yep.
You might have this next one. Like, what is the ideal sort of information to have in a label? It feels like is it supposed to be stuff like,
Yeah. So label basically describes the component. So like in the fewest words possible, like if you see this button, like as a person with no accessibility issues, you will think like, oh, that's gonna play some audio. So we just want to like put minimal number of information to describe the component. So as like a label to the button.
That sounds really similar to the hint.
Yeah, so the hint, so in this case, the hint is used in the wrong way. So the hint would kind of tell you like the result. Maybe, so like the hint is used in a good way, but it's not important in here. So the hint in 90% of cases shouldn't be used. So the hint is only used if what like the button does is not obvious to the user immediately. And I think I have an example later on about that. But yeah, that's a really good question. And this is something I did at the beginning. I just added accessibility label and hints everywhere. And the hint was repeating what label was saying. And like that, just adding too much information to the user. Cool. So I think we answered this question already, but is this accessible? Perfect. And we have an award. Cool. So is this accessible? And that's another tricky one because I haven't told you the rules yet.
Is it no, because money's got 2 Y's?
Yes.
So it's going to read good.
Yes. Yes, that's correct answer, but there's something else.
Is it going to say support us like really loud because it's in all caps?
Basically, yes. It's actually going to say support US because it's just assumed like United States. So yes, it's not accessible because the label should not be capitalized. It shouldn't have any typos. And also the hint should be in the third person. So if we really want to put that, well, we shouldn't. We would rather say like sends us money instead of like send us money because we don't want to give the orders to the user. We want to tell them what it's going to do. And then one tiny thing, the hint should be like as a sentence. So we also want to add the dot at the end. I haven't mentioned here, but that's why it's not accessible. So in this case, can someone tell me what would be the accessible way of labeling that? Yep.
Lowercase supports us and then sends us money.
Yeah, we could probably skip the us as well. Sends money to, or maybe us, yeah. Yeah.
What difference would the full stop make?
It actually gives like a little bit of space between saying the hint and the row. Yeah. Cool. And like a cool thing, interesting thing about this, like there is no right answer for it. Like everyone else can have like a different idea for it. But as long as we follow the guidelines, like it's cool. Nice. And then this one, is this accessible? Yep. I would say this is quite a good use of hint. Like the label would be like, and that's kind of what you would see as like a user. And then as a hint, you can add like add song to favorite. Because for example, that could be like in the song player, like in the track player, and like user with no accessibility issues would like see the whole player, so they would have a context. But if you focus on just one element, you may lack the whole context of the page. That's why this hint could be used in this way. And we have the award. And I didn't have more good pictures, so that's the end of the quiz. Then another rule, we want to avoid having elements that can only be operated using gestures. So here, the first one is not accessible version of the slider.
Title text. Title text.
I'm going to mute it. OK, and now you cannot see what I'm doing, but basically I'm trying to type on the slider, like tap on the lines, because if the screen reader is not turned on, I can move the slider by tapping on the lines, but I cannot do it with the screen reader turned on, and it doesn't give me any hints. It doesn't tell me what it's doing, so I would be really confused, and like I wouldn't know how to use it. And the only way that you could use it is to like slide with like 2 fingers. But it's quite difficult to like know where you should put your fingers because like the slider is quite small and your fingers, like 2 of them are quite big. So it's not a very accessible way of doing this. So the better one would be to also, for example, add
Bold. Decrease font size button. Double tap to activate.
So the better way would be to make the legend be accessible, so you can click on it and it's gonna move. So we add some buttons to.
Decrease font size button. Double tap to activate.
So we basically allow the user to move the slider in a different way, in a more accessible way. And I think it's also cool for like user with no accessibility issues. Like if you don't know how to swipe or like you have really fat fingers, you can just use the buttons. No judgment, by the way. Yep.
So I don't, maybe this is lack of understanding. What constitutes like gestures? So is that swiping?
Yes, that's usually just swiping, yeah. Good question.
Decrease font size. Decrease font size button. Disabled.
And then when we move to the end, we can see it's being disabled. And we can do this by using accessibility state and stating that the button is disabled, so we no longer can use it. And we also give the information to the user visually by changing the color of the button. I also wanted to go through forms, but we're kind of running out of time. So instead of showing you the demo, I just wanted to mention that it's very important to label the user input, add the meaningful placeholder text, show the error message, and use the appropriate keyboard type. So for example, if you put like the email, you have like an email field, you can specify that you want to use the email keyboard with like the like already on the keyboard. And that's not only good for people with accessibility issues, but like for any users. So it's also good to like shift your mindset from like, oh, I'm doing this so like people with disabilities can use it. No, like I'm doing this because I want to make the app like just more usable for like everyone. And like, for example, this will make the app way more easier to understand for users who will not use any screen reader or any other help. So yeah, and then the last thing I wanted to mention very quickly is React Native AMA. And that's the library created by Formidable that shows you immediate feedback loop if the components that you are having is not accessible. So for example, this is a button. It says on the screen automatically that this component violates the accessibility rules. And then if you open the console, you can see that it violates the rule because the minimum size of clickable components is 44 pixels to like 44 pixels. It's super cool. And to show you the code, how I did that, on the left-hand side, we just use the pressable component from React Native AMA. And on the right-hand side, we have a normal pressable component from React Native. And there's literally no other difference between these 2 components. So it's a really, really cool library. They have the normal like pressable text button components. So you can just replace them very quickly, like from React Native to React Native AMA. And then you will get this immediate feedback loop. And they also have like custom components, like for example, bottom sheets or carousels or I think sliders, but I'm not sure. So yeah, definitely really, really cool library. And it's really good to check out if you've got the time. But yeah, thank you so much. And